All right. I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the meeting of the Board of Supervisors in the afternoon at 3 p.m. for February 6th, 2018. And as is our custom, we'll start off with an invocation, which will be led by Pastor Adam Foster from the Mizpah Christian Church, and that'll be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Supervisor Alvarez. If you please stand as you're able. Pastor, come forward.
Real quick, I'd like to thank everybody for the opportunity to come and lead the invocation. And I'd also like to share 1 Timothy 2. First of all, then, I urge that supplication, prayer, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. This is good, and it is pleasing in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. Please join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, we praise you for this opportunity to come together. Lord, I pray that your Spirit is with us in this time of meeting. Lord, let it be your will that is done through all the acts that are made and through all the decisions that are made. Lord, just bless the proceedings and be with everybody here. And we ask all this in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the first item on the agenda for this afternoon will be the citizen comment period. This is a time when any citizen that wishes to speak to this board can come forward to the microphone and speak on any item that pertains to Goochland County business. At this point, I'll go ahead and open up the citizen comment period. And as you come forward, I'd like to remind you to please give us your name and address for the record and keep your remarks to about 3 minutes. So thank you much.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lisa Perkins. I reside at 1005 Hermitage Road in Mannequin-Sabot. What I wanted to ask about today, in addition, we've recently been raising concerns about a rezoning project, Dover Branch. But now we have specific concerns on some wetlands that we know have been identified, but not fully disclosed by Dover Branch, nor considered as part of their request. We have serious concerns that the zoning request from A2 to R1 is an effort to circumvent the A2 requirements of minimum setback due to the wetlands at the back of the property. We ask that the county fully investigate and respect the wetlands requirements for the construction. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Would anyone else like to come forward? 3, 2, 1. Yeah. Are you coming forward or are you retreating?
He's going back. He's leaving.
Okay. We'll take that as a no. So we'll go ahead and close the citizen comment period. The next item is the chairman's comments, and I'd just like to remind everybody that our upcoming semi-annual town hall meetings are about to kick off. These will be joint town hall meetings with the entire school board and entire board of supervisors hold these meetings jointly. There'll be 3, as is our custom. Districts 4 and 5 will hold a joint town hall on Wednesday, March 7th at 7 p.m. at the Hermitage. District 1 on Tuesday, March 20th, 7 p.m. at Fire Station number 4. And the third one will be for Districts 2 and 3 jointly on Wednesday, March 28th at 7 p.m. at the Central High School building. That's all I had for the board's consumption today. The next item is request to postpone agenda items and additions, deletions, or changes in the order of presentation. And I have a couple of them. One is I'd like to delete the consent agenda item number 2626, which is under consent items Roman numeral 10, as that item is not I guess the legal term is ripe, not ripe for consideration by this board. So we'll wait and see when that becomes ready. We'll reschedule that one. The other item I had was the board representative on the Volunteer Fire and Rescue Board will give us an update and a report out on the fire rescue operations, and that will take place, I'm going to suggest, under reports, which is Roman numeral 9, item 2, after the chief's fire rescue presentation. And if the board's okay with both of those, are there any other suggestions for additions, deletions, or changes to the order? Okay. All right. If that's without objection, we'll go ahead and move ahead. The next item on the agenda is the minutes approval. We've got 2 sets of minutes. They're in your board packet. You've had a chance to review them. One was for the work session on December 11th, 2017, and one was for our regular board meeting on January 3rd, 2018. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes to the minutes?
Mr. Chair, I move approval of the December 11th, 2017 and January 3rd, 2018 board meeting minutes.
Okay, it's been moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Okay, that's unanimous. Those minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is the county administrator's comments. Mr. Badesky, do you have comments for the group?
Just a few items today, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Just, you had announced earlier that the town hall meetings were going to be held in the month of March. We really encourage folks' attendance at those meetings. We will be focusing on the budget recommendation that I'll be delivering on February 20th to the board. Always good opportunity for us to hear citizen feedback as it relates to the budget. Amongst other items, the schools also share some of that time with us to present at those opportunities as well. Particularly want to call out the District 2 and 3 meeting at Central High School. We are at our next board meeting on March 6th actually dedicating the historic wing along with the committee members that did all the work in the planning there. And that work will be completed in time for us to host that town hall meeting. And so we encourage everyone and extend an invite to our community to join us for that opening at 1:30 p.m. on March 6th at Central High. So we're excited for that. Prior to that meeting, if you want to make a day of it, we have an audit committee meeting being held here at 11:30. And we do kick off all of our budgetary meetings that will occur between now and potential April adoption. So encourage participation throughout the budget process. If you're unable to make it to the meetings, we always welcome the calls and letters that share thoughts and concerns that we can consider in that process. Mr. Chairman, last thing I have today for you is an item that we've talked about a number of times amongst ourselves as a board, and that is the concern that has been shared with us by our school partners relating to their JROTC programming. They had heard that funding was going to be eliminated mid-year this year. The school board has stepped up. They, like us, see the priority and value of that program to our community and to our students. They have taken a very active campaign, and we join them in support on that campaign. That program has been a real asset to our community and the students that have participated. We have and will continue to send support letters consistent with the school board's requests, but that is a program that we are continuing to hear more about. The schools actually on their website have listed contact information and draft letters that they would encourage as many residents as possible to actually send to our representatives that would gain additional support for this program. And so we in support of our school partners, encourage our residents to do that as well. Mr. Chairman, with that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Badesky. Okay, the next item on our agenda this evening is report outs. We've got the first item is VDOT, Virginia Department of Transportation, and I believe Mr. McNabb, you'll be delivering the presentation today, so please come forward. And welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'd like to start with a couple items that are not written down there. The first is to apologize for our absence at the January meeting. That actually ties into a little bit to the maintenance report. That was the day before the first snow in January. And as I recall, that was one of the ones that came up a little bit fast, and so we were scrambling at 1 month ago, and we were not able to be here, and I do apologize for that. Secondly, I want to let you know the reason Marshall Wynn is not here today and not delivering this report is he has been temporarily reassigned within VDOT. He is now managing our Interstate North maintenance program, the north side of the metro area. I try and emphasize temporarily. Marshall wants to come back and work with the residency. That is the plan. We fully expect he will be back with us in a month or two, but in his absence, I'm very pleased to present the report today. In terms of the written report, starting off with the maintenance section, I believe the items in both the east and west parts of the county are pretty routine for winter. Potholes and plowing snow. It seems like we're doing one or the other just about every day, or getting ready for snow or cleaning up from snow. Going over to the other page, construction, we have some good news on a couple of projects that I know are of interest to the board. The first being the interchange improvements at Route 250 and Route 250 West Broad and 288. As you can see, the plans for that project are now about 40% complete. We have posted and provided a advertisement saying that VDOT is willing to have a public hearing or a public meeting about that project. I understand some comments are in. A decision has not been made yet whether there will be a public meeting, but I would refer you to that advertisement. There is a deadline. I think that's the deadline comes up fairly soon, so if people would like to have a public meeting, we need to know that. And the other project is the new traffic signal at West Creek and Patterson. That project is also coming along well. It's in what we call the right-of-way phase. We do not anticipate any problems in that phase. So we are now estimating the project should go to our on-call construction contractor by this summer. If so, the project would be done this fall. Caveat, things can always happen, but we will keep you posted on that. With that, I'd be glad to answer any questions about what I covered or what I did not.
Questions?
One, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McNabb, Mr. Wynn was looking for a stop sign for fairgrounds, the flashing stop
Yes.
sign. Has he been successful?
Yes, we do have the sign. We
Okay.
just need a little bit of good weather to get that
Okay.
installed. So
Great.
hopefully before too long.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Wynn, Mr. Wynn.
It's okay. I consider that a
That's just,
compliment.
Mr. McNabb, so, sorry Mr. Wynn's not here. I had sent him an email a couple of weeks ago about Shannon Hill Road, Route 605. There's some serious degradation of the pavement along the side. I can resend the email to you as
Okay.
well,
Okay.
but we'd like maybe someone to take a look at that.
Okay.
And I have a second
Okay.
question. I did see the advertisement for willingness to hold a meeting on the 288 and 250. I'm not sure what that really means. I mean, I know what willing to hold a meeting is, but what,
Right.
I mean, we know where the project is, right?
Right.
What's the purpose of this?
And I apologize, I meant to explain that a little bit further.
Okay.
The, what we're saying is we've reached the 40% stage. If people would like to look at the plans, and we can even do that if they have the right computer capability or they want to go to Colonial Heights, if they want to see the plans now to see how the project's progressing. There have been minor changes so far in the design process, nothing real huge, but just at this stage, we want to provide that opportunity. It's by no means mandatory. That's why we do it that way, to say,
Right.
if people are interested, we'll hold the meeting. We don't want to take the time to prepare for a big meeting if we can answer questions before that time.
Is it an opportunity for input?
Oh,
or-
yes, definitely, sure, yeah, no, that's at 40%, there's still lots of opportunity to make changes, so.
And
we
and
would-
if you were to hold it, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
That's okay.
If you were to hold it, would it be locally here in Goochland?
Yes, definitely,
Okay, a day and time to be determined, place.
Correct.
Okay. And it's on your website?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Hey, Mr. McNabb. Just in Marshall's absence, a couple of residents in Hickory Haven asked me to see if VDOT could potentially look into some traffic calming measures in their
Sure.
residential development. I'll just keep it broad at some sort of traffic calming.
Okay.
There's been reports of excessive speed and a couple dogs being run over, and there's kids in that neighborhood too.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Did you want me to check with Marshall or send him or you want me to send you a note or something?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay.
If you give us contact information, any details you've got, we'll be glad to look into that.
Yep. Thank you.
Ms. McNabb, I just had one or two real quick.
Sure.
I don't know if you're aware or familiar. There's I believe it's Columbia Gas is burying a pipeline along Mannequin Road near the Hermitage Road intersection, up toward Broad Street, but not quite that far. Is that they're using the VDOT right away, I guess, and they're burying it on the road.
Right.
Is VDOT doing that work, or is an outside contractor doing that work, or is that?
It'd be an outside contractor.
Be an outside contractor?
No.
Okay. Do you check to make sure they're doing their work consistent with your policies as well?
Yes, we do. Yep, they're in our right-of-way.
Do you send folks out there on a periodic basis just to monitor the activity?
Right, and we'd review their plans in advance and then make sure they're doing it according to those plans.
Okay. The reason I pass that along is I've gotten some preliminary feedback from citizens that perhaps that work wasn't being done up to VDOT standards.
Okay.
So
all right.
We know that you guys have a very high bar and you do things really well. So
we'll be glad to check on
I
that.
appreciate that. The only other thing I had was I did mention the times and dates for the town hall meetings, and I would request that some representative from VDOT attend each of them so that we can answer citizens' questions directly as opposed to say, we'll get back to you.
Sure.
Appreciate that. All right, that's all I had. Anybody else? Okay. Thanks very much for the report.
Thank you.
We hope it doesn't snow anymore, so there's plenty of funds left over. The next item is fire rescue. Chief?
Good afternoon, board members. Mr. Badesky, Bill McKay, Fire Rescue Chief. Be relatively brief tonight, or today. Little synopsis on 2017. 2017, we saw an 8% overall annual increase in calls. The month of December, because of cold weather and a variety of other things, alone saw an increase of over 20% in our call volume for just the month of December. Fire loss last year is going to be in excess of $3 million compared to about $400,000 in 2016. As you know, in December we had a large loss fire of $2 million on the 23rd in Meadows, and well as some other smaller fire losses that occurred there. So our fire loss is significantly up. Good news to report, January 19th, God bless you, we swore in all of our 2018 officers. We held that here. That's the first time we ever did a collective department swearing in service of all of our officers in leadership for 2018. And it was received well. It was a test balloon, for lack of a better word, and most of the folks have expressed their desire to continue that. So we'll formalize that, and of course in the future extend invitations to the board as well to be present. Bit of sad news. December and early January was a rough month for us. We lost Chief Howard Henley, Captain William Dabney, and in early January we also lost Sherry Sackett. Between Captain Dabney and Chief Henley, we had over 100 years of service to Goochland County just between those two individuals. And Ms. Sackett was a prior chair of the board of directors back about 3 years ago, and had been having some health issues, and we lost her earlier this month. So we appreciate the community support and the outpouring of support that we received on the loss of those 3 long-term members and dedicated members of our organization. We'll host another Survivor Day on April 21st at Company 1. As you know, Survivor Day is that opportunity where we share with the citizens to make them more resilient when we have tornadoes, hurricanes, other weather-related and man-made events that occur. And we encourage everybody to come out. That we do that in cooperation with our regional partners within the metro area. The department has received a donation of over 100 smoke alarms. So that will allow us to continue providing smoke alarms to those folks who need smoke alarms, who don't have the financial resources to provide them their own smoke alarm. Once again, fortunate that Goochland County finished 2017 with no civilian fire deaths in residences. Unfortunately, we did have 1 civilian fire death that occurred during an automobile accident. But once again, congratulations to our residents who are practicing safety, but we want them to know that we have smoke alarms if they need them, and I'll be happy to help them install those and make sure that they're safe. Shining Night VCU Gala is their premier gala that they have every year, where they pick a significant event that occurred in the community. They follow that individual from the time of the tragedy or the accident until the time they're successfully discharged from VCU's trauma unit. Goochland County has once again been selected as the recipient of their Shining Night Award. This is the second time in the last 3 years that little old Goochland County, comparing with all the other big boys, is going to be recognized in a very large and premier event down at the convention center sometime in April. We're really proud and ecstatic about this. We ran an incident out on 64, serious motor vehicle accident. Young lady was pinned underneath the vehicle, hot motor oil and vehicle fluids dripping down on top of her, actually ingested some of them, obviously very critically injured, critically burned. Successful transportation to VCU. She had a great burn team there, great medical team. She recovered enough that we were able to transport her to her college graduation back in May, and she has been successfully discharged, and we are going to be recognized once again. So hats off to all the members of Goochland Fire Rescue. You guys support us with a tremendous amount of financial resources to make sure that we can deliver high-quality service to our residents. But at the end of the day, it comes down to our members. Our members have to take the resources that you give them and provide that service to those people who are in need. And we're lucky we have a dedicated and committed group of individuals, both volunteer and career, who are here every day. And this type of thing shows the community how great our system is here in Goochland. Unfortunately, we had 1 resignation again, so we're carrying 2 vacancies. It just seems that we can never get up to full staffing, but we certainly appreciate the support that you give us on that, and we try real hard to keep those positions filled. But it's tough when individuals are looking to run a lot of calls and have upward mobility opportunities, and they want them now. They want to go to the Henricos, the Chesterfields, the City of Richmonds, who have a much greater call volume than we do, and a much bigger system for upward mobility. And we are planning for our first ever Fire Rescue Citizens Academy. In the past, we've had a fire camp for teenagers and youngsters. The sheriff has a very successful program that he runs, a Citizens Police Academy and Citizens Sheriff's Academy, pardon me. And we're gonna steal some of those ideas, and we're going to open up our doors to the residents of the community, and in the late spring host a Citizens Fire Rescue Academy to give them a glimpse as to what kind of work we do, and also use it as a recruitment tool to get some more volunteers within our system, hopefully. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions for the chief?
Just, Mr. Chairman, real quick. Chief, the Survivor Day is just an awesome event that you put on every year, you and the staff. So to sign up for that, how do people sign up?
Survivorday.org is the website, and we'll be publicizing that as we get a little further into the month here. And they can go on there. They can link to any of the other Survivor Days that are being held. Some of the people may live closer to one or another in another locality, so they're open to everybody, and you can select the event you want to attend. But they're all held the same day, the 21st.
Right. Okay. Wonderful. Yep. Thank you very much.
Other? Well, Chief, that was some very
Good news.
and some
Good
very
news and
bad
bad
news, and our thoughts and prayers are with the families that suffered a loss, and congratulations on another great year. You mentioned resignations and staying fully staffed. Are you in touch with the schools? I believe they offer now a firefighter 1 and firefighter 2 courses.
Yeah,
Is
we
that-
actually do that for them.
You do?
We have
Okay.
a public safety class that we work in conjunction with the Sheriff's Academy. We have 2/3 of the curriculum. We have an EMS component that we did in the fall. The Sheriff's Office has them right now doing the law enforcement component, and we will pick them up again at the end of March and continue to the end of the year doing the firefighting component. So we use that as a recruitment tool as well. And one of our ultimate goals, I think I've shared this with the board before, is to get a program in place where we can train people to be at the EMT level, give them firefighter up to firefighter 2, and then when they graduate high school, they have all of the requirements to become a career member of the organization if they so choose. If they so choose to volunteer, great. And then give them preferential treatment in the hiring process because we know them, they already have the skill set, and
It sounds fantastic. Is that a fairly popular course? Is there?
it's a
some
vision.
interest?
It's a vision that
vision?
we have.
Okay.
Let me say that.
Good. Well, I like the vision.
Okay.
So,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Chief. And then, as we mentioned, Mr. Stuart Dalton will bring some remarks for the as our board representative on the Volunteer Fire and Rescue Board. Mr.
Good
Dalton.
afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon.
Board members, Mr. Badesky. Appreciate this time to get together with y'all. Just give you a brief overview of our January 2018 meeting and some topics that came up that may be concerned to the Board of Supervisors and Mr. Badesky and everything. One thing we looked at and talked about was the large event coverage policy. I know that's being reviewed by the Board of Supervisors in the county. And again, the Board of Directors supports this policy. It's a good thing to put in place to help us recoup costs due to these large events such as Field Day of the Past, Razzlewick, as examples of we get these large gatherings of people and everything where fire rescue resources are needed. So again, we definitely support that policy as it goes forward. A change in possible policy on volunteer members under the age of 18 call running restrictions. Right now, those members that are 16 and 17 need to vacate the station at 10 o'clock at night and go home and be ready for school the next day and so forth. We've had one member that's raised the question of potentially looking at a change to that procedure and that policy to allow those members to start running call after that 10 o'clock cutoff time. There has been some concerns in the past where volunteer members have been dropped off on a Friday night, left all weekend, their parents pick them up, Sunday night, something like that. So again, 16 and 17-year-olds being unsupervised in a fire station just brings up a little concern and everything, but times have changed. Our stations are now staffed with, personnel on the career side. So again, I think it's worth looking at, opening up, and the boards will look at that to see if there's any changes to that policy to try to accommodate these young members. And again, a lot of them get their start at a young age, and as Chief McKay was alluding to, they may come a career here in Goochland or wherever it may be as a volunteer and or a career member. So it's definitely something that we want to look at and everything. The replacement of the quick response vehicles, again, I know that's a line item for the upcoming budget year, but just want to keep it in the forefront. Right now, 2 out of the 3 vehicles are out of service due to safety issues, and these vehicles were owned by the association. What happened before was they was purchased by the county and then titled to the association. So due to safety concerns of those vehicles, they were taken out of service. There are 2 down, and the third one right now being used is probably near its end of service life. So again, as we keep it on the forefront, those vehicles definitely serve a purpose in our fire rescue services and providing service to the citizens, especially during inclement weather. Some of the access we have to businesses and homes especially can be very difficult, and these 4-wheel drive vehicles, SUV type vehicles, can definitely play a part in our fire rescue services and everything. Update on the sale of Company 6, which is the old Company 6 on Broad Street Road. That price is now going to be reduced to $295,000 to try to attract some more suitors for that property. I think it's been very minimal or non-existent right now. Maybe a few phone calls from people inquiring about it, but as far as any potential sales, it's been pretty low. So the board that's looking at it is reducing that price to $295,000. The associations will have an annual dinner this year. It is scheduled for March 3rd at Company 1, starting at 5:30 p.m. So this invitation is for all board members and Mr. Badesky to attend that event. What we're trying to do is get the annual event, the annual dinner, in a more timely manner. If you're familiar with the past, we've had them in October and November, celebrating the prior year and roll us into the next year. So again, trying to get a more timely manner, and starting in 2019, the annual dinners, more formal type dinner, will be in the first quarter of that calendar year. So just kind of get more timely and recognize people in a timely manner. And this year would be a scaled down version, kind of like a picnic style get together, and just recognizing people for their years of service with a more formal dinner and representation and recognizing people next year in 2019. So I believe Chief McKay will get with Lisa to get this on the calendars and everything, so y'all be aware of that, and you're definitely invited to attend. Fire Rescue adopted a policy effective July 1st, 2018 that requires all new members, they receive a health assessment to make sure they are fit for duty and to make sure that they have proof of health care insurance. Again, our business can be very dangerous at times. Things can happen, people get hurt, people get injured, and illness. And we will make sure that those people that are coming aboard now are, able to fit to do that job through a health assessment to get to make sure they're receiving they have the proper health to do everything we need to do and everything. And also with the proof of health care insurance, a couple of times in the past, we all know if you get injured on the job, I know volunteers is not workman's comp, but again, we do have a policy that covers our injuries and illnesses may be denied. And now that person may be stuck with if they don't have health insurance, they may be stuck with the cost of that hospital visit. And trying to eliminate if they get denied from what they did performing fire rescue duties, at least they have their health insurance they can fall back on to cover their costs. Because if not, it's on them then. So we're trying to eliminate that process or eliminate happening and everything. And lastly, effective March 1st, 2018, the public protection classification rating for Goshen County is improving to a 5.5Y. The Board of Directors is very excited about that. That's a great win for the citizens of this county as it can lower home and business premiums on their insurance ratings and everything. So again, working with Chief McKay and the Board of Directors working with him. Just one little tidbit here. It's a 10-point scale. So right now we're the 5.5Y. We are 1.23 points away from that next highest rating, which would be a 4. So that's a very minimal rating change that we can to look at, make some improvements in the fire rescue side of the business. And again, maybe within next year, if we work with the insurance service office on this, it could improve again to even a better rating. So again, that's very exciting news. We're very happy for the department, the water department, emergency communications center, fire rescue working together. It's definitely a huge improvement, and we look forward to the benefits it's going to provide us and the citizens of this county. At that time, I'm finished, and I'll be glad to entertain any questions y'all may have.
We have any questions for Mr. Dalton? Okay. Just thank you for the work that you do in representing this board, and thank you for reporting out.
Okay, thank you, sir. Y'all have a good day.
You do the same. Okay. Next item is the Planning Commission annual report, and I believe the Planning Commission is required to report to this board annually about their activities. There's a report in the package.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the report is made as per law requirements. That's available to the board. We needed to go on record providing that to the board. Also in your packet is your planning and development activity report and your accounts payable report. Staff are available to answer any questions amongst any of the items should you have.
Okay, those three reports are for information only with no action required. They've been included in your packet. Are there any questions? No questions. Excellent reports. Next item, as we mentioned, the consent item has been deleted for this meeting. The next item after that is our new business. And the first item under new business is a General Assembly legislative update. And as I understand it, our General Assembly dog, Mr. Drumright, is down at the General Assembly as we speak. So pinch hitting for Mr. Drumright will be our County Administrator, Mr. Badesky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Marshall was also with Paul down there representing our interests. They are actually, we're waiting for the afternoon session to end. Committees start 30 minutes after. Told Paul that we'd try to hold up for him, but General Assembly didn't decide to wait on us here today. So we're going to go over a couple of the items that we have in our agenda and priorities and give you a little bit of a brief update. I have to say I'm extremely pleased with the support this board provides. There's a lot of information that goes through during this period of time. We're really excited that crossover is coming up here next week. And so we're actually give you a little bit of a time frame of where we're at now. Obviously, session has begun in earnest, and there's a lot coming through. Once we hit crossover, you'll see a little bit of a slowdown from new, but bills will be crossing over. Still a lot of work to be done between now and the adjournment on the 10th. So bills are crossing different houses, and you'll see some of that in some of the status of the bills that we're going to report here. But as you can see down below, Pulse included some statistics. It's pretty staggering to see how over 3,000 bills have been submitted at this point. So it's early on, only 100 plus have made it out with approvals. A lot, as you're aware, don't make it out of committee for consideration, but give you a status on where some of ours are at. At this point, there were no corresponding bills related to one of our priorities on transportation of sludge. At this point, we're not hopeful that we're going to see much more on that this session. So potentially next session, there was some funding bills being discussed, but at this point, there's nothing submitted. At this point, the makeup of the Economic Development Authority, Delegate Ware did carry this for us. It did pass on the House side, and it's going to the Senate committee next. We have not heard much specific concern regarding our particular request. You may have recalled there was actually a representative out of Chesterfield that had some concerns about EDAs more broadly, but ours is just regarding the makeup of our current structure, slightly different than the concern that you may have heard of there. Public facility capacity determination. This is often what we talk about as it relates to our proffer discussions. And you'll see here shortly, there's a lot of bills that have come. Some have come and gone, but you can at least see where, and actually the first bill that you see there by Delegate Ware has actually failed. But the one with Center Peak's actually being heard this afternoon. That's where Paul and Ms. Marshall are. And we'll go through a few more that are listed in future slides. Our other priority on expanding broadband, as of right now, there seems to be support, whether or not it makes it through the full process, but to add $2 million to the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative, that will make communities with unserved and underserved have an opportunity to actually apply for those funds. And so we've been in support of that. And as of right now, we're sensing support, but a lot of time left on that. We have continued to support reimbursements of the compensation for the expenses of the Electoral Board and the General Registrar. At this point, there is no bills filed. Also, as it relates to the Registrar's operations and local expenses, the reimbursement for political party primaries. At this point, it's still on for actually tomorrow, you can see, but at this point we don't have a good status on whether this has not been successful in prior years. I'm not very hopeful it wasn't included in the governor's budget request, so it would have to be amended. And so there's still potential for this, but a lot of work to go on that particular bill. This is probably one of the successes we can say is an early success. One that you wouldn't think that would have to take this much initiative in the first place, but our friends at the Goochland Drive-In were actually granted an exception to the current VDOT policy to allow them to put up their sign. Not only will they benefit, but also 5 additional drive-ins in the Commonwealth will benefit from this. So therefore, the actual legislative language change that we had did not move forward, but the real solution was achieved. There was some concern that if they would have actually moved the legislation through that we were suggesting, it would actually jeopardize some federal funding. And so at the end of the day, this issue was actually resolved to success, or an early win. This gives you just a little bit of a summary of some of the other bills that are going through as it relates to proffers. Most of these are going through here today, this afternoon. So we're curious to see what some of the perspectives will be there. All of them had slightly different takes on what the impact would have been to localities. And the last one that you see, there's actually a potential study of the issue. I think you may be aware that staff and attorney's office had met with the Home Builders Association. There wasn't much support from them to make individual changes. They wanted something more wholesale. Also, they weren't necessarily in favor of the study. but that has still been something that was under consideration. I think we'll learn a little bit more after this afternoon. So you can see a little bit more about a few others here. A couple have been passed by indefinitely, which basically means it was killed. House Bill 89, House Bill 163, and 1446. Some bills that are coming up that are still of issue to us, and Mr. Creasy had brought to us some concerns of the ham radio operators. House Bill 181, still moving through the process. There's some concern that it's not exactly what the ham radio operators were looking for, because they were looking for not just during emergencies, but even during exercises, and some of these bills exclude during exercises. So I'm not sure it gets them exactly where they're going, and Senate Bill 74 is along the same lines. And the last one, at this point, the Certificate of Public Need, which was another issue of concern. We're still hopeful, and Mr. Alvarez joined us as we went in support of Madarva's Certificate of Need. I guess it was a month and a half ago now. That process had actually left that process with an unfavorable recommendation. I talked to Bruce, and they're still confident that there's still a possibility of consideration for that. But as far as it relates to legislative solutions, still working its way through the process, but not seeing a lot of general support there. So with that, that gives you sort of a quick summary of the bills of interest to us. The county attorney's office is a huge help to this process, while Paul takes sort of a lead role. The county attorney's office and individual county departments weigh in quite extensively throughout this process, and with your support, I think we have, for a jurisdiction of our size, we have a very active presence and at the General Assembly, and I think our recommendations and thoughts are respected. So with that, stand ready to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Badesky. Do we have any questions at this point?
Just one comment.
Okay.
Well, actually, two comments. Mr. Drumright just does a tremendous job. So he keeps up with the legislation. He's down there. I mean, it's really amazing. He's doing a super job for us. And then also, we are supporting a budget amendment for the sludge studies. I think we have already put in a recommendation, our support of it, right?
Yes, Ms. Leifert, we have.
Right. Who knows? We'll see where that goes. But at any rate, thank you.
Anything else? Thank you very much. Appreciate all your efforts on this. I know it's quite an undertaking to track 3,000 bills as they're moving minute by minute down the General Assembly. Okay, the next item is our reassessment report. Our county assessor, Marianne Davis.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Badesky, Ms. McBee, Ms. Maybe, I'll get it right one of these days, McGee. All right. I am Marianne Davis, the county assessor, and I want to present the 2018 real estate assessment report. Let's see. Okay. Some highlights. The assessments are made at the market value as of January 1st of each year. The assessments were mailed out on Friday, January the 12th, and the property owners have until Thursday, February 15th, to appeal their assessments. Okay. Some summary of the value changes. The total taxable figure net of land use is up to about 4.4%. That's $4.85 billion. The 4.4 comprises of 3% revaluation and the 1.4 in new construction. The TCSD fair market values are up 4.4 to $1 billion. And the land use assessments are up 1.4% from 571 to 579 million. And this is some charts. The bar chart here shows the historical taxable assessed values. We're now at the point where we've surpassed the 2009 mark, so we're recovered fairly well. The next one is the new construction in the millions. We've had $33 million of the 64 is in the county, and then 31 million of new construction was in the TCSD this past year. We did not have very much commercial that was picked up, although I have a feeling that will change this coming year. The pie graph, which shows the assessed valuation based on residential to commercial percentages. The numbers inside the pie reflect the 2018 percentages. So the 18.97 is the commercial versus the 81.03, which is residential. The numbers outside the pie to the right is the 2017 numbers, which show the commercial at 19.6 and the residential, which is for 2017, 80.4. And this is the bar graph showing the Tuckahoe Creek Service District, showing the growth of the 4.4%, which includes the 3.2% in new construction, and the 1.2 is in reassessment. And then the land use deferment, the rates went up a little bit this year, so we see an increase of $579 million in the deferment, which equates to about $3 million in deferred revenue. So in summary, January assessed value change of the 4.4% is more than the estimated November of the 3%. The revenue projection assumed another 3% increase in the taxable value as of next year, January 2019. You know, future is uncertain, so you really don't know what to expect. And then our staff will do another report on appeal activity in April. And as of now, we have about 65 appeals. Okay. Any questions?
You have any questions for Ms. Davis?
The 65 appeals, how does that compare to prior years? Is that about average?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's about the same. Mhm.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Davis, I know, I guess it was last year that we reconfirmed all of the land use deferments. That's an annual process, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. How is that going so far this year?
We finished. We got everything done. You know, I think we had maybe one, again, another person that didn't revalidate, and they kind of knew last year they were riding the wave out. They didn't qualify, so
Okay.
they're just, you know, now paying on fair market value, kind of working out of the system.
It sounds like a lot smoother process than last year.
Oh, yeah. Each year, you know, we get the deadlines down, and, you know, people are getting used to it, and, you know, the whole process went smooth.
Okay, well, thank you for all your work on that.
Wow.
Anything else from Ms. Davis?
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
All right.
Next item is our economic development update, annual update from our economic development director, Mr. Matt Ryan. Matt?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Badesky, Matthew Ryan, Director of Economic Development, and I'm here today to give you a 2017 annual update. So quickly, I'm just going to cover the highlights from last year, some of the highlights, the metrics that I normally report on, a brief update on the Economic Development Authority, the ongoing strategic planning process, and leave room for all of your questions. So a couple of the updates from last year. Obviously, I believe everybody was in attendance, but Licking Hole announced the plans for their $12 million Goochland County expansion. We had Hardywood Brewery's ribbon cutting earlier at $28 million facility with a grand opening is scheduled for spring of 2018. As far as I know, everything is still on schedule to meet that date. Lots of beer if you're seeing the trend here. Bristol Apartments under construction. The first CO, Certificate of Occupancies, were issued last month. That project is in West Creek. The $26 million Drive Shack announcement, they're anticipating a 2018 opening. You can see earthwork is currently occurring. If you're on 288 northbound, you can see the equipment down there now working on the earthwork. Page outing is nearing completion. This is a picture from Page looking towards Broad Street with some additional developments slated for 2018 in the eastern Broad Street corridor. Just last week or the week before, you may have saw in the paper the announcement of the hotel. There's additional retail that will be coming along with that, and then hopefully here in the next month or two, we'll be able to announce another project adjacent to the Audi and Drive Shack. And then last but not least, the EDA. Through the EDA, we provided conduit financing for the Sheltering Arms Rehab Hospital That project is moving along very quickly, and we'll probably see some earth moving going on there in the next month or two. So the eastern end of the county is going to have a lot of heavy equipment moving dirt here in the coming months. And then the notable projects, just on a map, you can see everything is in the eastern end of the county in the designated growth area, mostly Broad Street corridor, and then the West Creek properties on down south to Patterson Avenue there at Oak Hill. So quickly going through the metrics, capital investment numbers last year, we were just north of $120 million, which as far as I can tell was a record for Goochland County. Obviously the trend dipped down a little bit there in 2012, still want to point out that was one called a home run project at Capital One of $43 million. So it's been relatively steady with a pretty large increase in 16 and 17. And then already this year in the first quarter, we're seeing what we saw last year. So I don't want to say we're necessarily going to beat the number from last year, but we're going to be pretty strong this year as well. And then there's that chart over the 10-year period. So you can see, obviously, last year was a record-setting year for us and much higher than it was 2008 through 2011. The assessed valuation, not going to go into this. Obviously, Ms. Davis just went over this, so you got all that information. Commercial permits were up last year with 131 permits. New commercial square footage, we had just under under 800,000 square feet of new commercial square footage. And that segues into this slide, which if there's any takeaway from today, I think this is one to really look at, showing the office, retail, and industrial. Currently in the Goochland office market, we have about a 4% vacancy rate. That equates to about 12,000 square feet of available space is all that's left in the county right now for office. Compare that to the region of a 6.9% vacancy rate. And just a little snapshot, just alone if you look at the what they call the Northwest market, which is basically the West End, Innsbrook, Glenside, there's currently 1.9 million square feet of available space with a quoted rate of $18.44. So our quoted rate in Goochland right now is about $24 a square foot. So very limited square footage, and that's something, obviously with nothing in the pipeline per se for rentable square footage, that's going to be potentially an issue for us in the coming months. Looking next at retail, we have a 1.2% vacancy rate. We currently have 4,852 square feet of available space in the retail. Luckily, we do have some stuff in the pipeline that will hopefully be coming online here in the next 18 months. But is in a comparison, if you look at, again, that Northwest market and then what they call the Southwest market, which is the Jeff Davis corridor, there's 3 million square feet of available space. So again, we have 4,852 square feet compared to 3 million in our surrounding localities. And last but not least, on the industrial market, Goochland currently is sitting at 7.4%, which is 58,000 square feet, with a quoted average rate of $7.71. If you look at the Southwest Industrial Corridor, which is just the I-95 through the city and the Jeff Davis Corridor, there's 2.5 million square feet of available space at a quoted rate of $4 a square foot. So again, this is something we need to be keeping track of as we're moving forward, and hopefully we will start to see some speculative construction. Usually when you start seeing under 5%, spec construction would be going gangbusters, but we're still not seeing the speculative space. Everything is being built to suit. So more to come on that in my next update, but just wanted you to be aware of that. Unemployment rates have gotten low, not necessarily record-setting lows, but we are 3.3%. Those rates look to continue to stay at that level. The employment growth, as you can see from 2012, we've added over 4,000 jobs in Goochland County. If you recall last year, I think we announced we set a record with that number, leading the Commonwealth in jobs created. Business licenses staying about the same through there. Then a quick update on the Economic Development Authority. So overall, we've seen an increase last year frequency of requests for financial assistance. Because of that increase, the EDA has developed and approved a set of criteria for a loan program. Previously, in years past, we've received requests. Everything has been handled as sort of a one-off process. So the authority decided to streamline that process and make it kind of a similar process for everyone. So that has been designed and approved. I believe they approved that back in November of last year. We have not had anybody come through to request funding yet, but I would assume it's going to be happening here sooner than later. And then also the EDA is working closely with economic development staff on the 2018 strategic plan. So as I segue into strategic planning, as you recall, we've been talking about this for a little bit now. Phase 1 of the data collection, the online survey, stakeholder meetings, and statistical information. Phase 2 will be a joint meeting with the Board of Supervisors and the EDA, looking at a May date to revisit the previous strategic plan and talk about how we're moving forward, and then determining strategies for success, and then draft the plan with the adoption. There will be an EDA review, a Board of Supervisors review before the final adoption. Next steps, obviously strategic plan is at the forefront. The EDA has been discussing possibly considering developing some incubator space. We're hearing about that obviously in other markets. The EDA has been talking about it for the last couple months, so that'll probably kick back up for us. Continuing with the existing business visitation program, and then continuing on the development of current prospects. And I think that's it. Is there any questions of anything that I went over or did not go over?
Any questions for Mr. Ryan? No questions. For a nice presentation. Thank you very much, Mr. Ryan. Next item on the agenda is appointments, and we've got a fair number of appointments to do on at least, looks like maybe 4 boards and commissions. And I think there's been a couple of last-minute changes as well. So perhaps we could take one board or one commission at a time. And the first board would be the Board of Zoning Appeals. There's 2 individuals in the packet. Are there any additions or deletions? Additional? If it's just the 2, then I'll go ahead and entertain a motion on those 2.
Let me, if I may, just bring to your attention that with respect to Mr. Spoonhauer, you are actually, and you may do so in one motion, but you're approving not only for him to fulfill the remaining term, but also appointment for his a full term as well. So just so that that's clear, and that's how we'll express your recommendation to the Circuit Court.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman,
Sorry, just for more clarification before we do the motion. The BZA, these are appointments, or are these recommendations to the court?
To the BZA, the recommendations to the Circuit Court.
Okay, so that would be the motion then. Thank you.
Sorry,
I just want to make sure. Yeah,
You know
I'm ready now.
You know I was going to say it wrong anyway.
No, I knew you were going to
Just
say it. I
second
knew you were going
it,
to say it right.
Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend Ms. Amanda Kowalski to be appointed effective February 6, 2018, fulfilling the unexpired term of Harriet D. Phillips, whose term expires May 31st, 2022. And then I also recommend or move to recommend Mr. Neil Spoonhauer to be appointed effective February 6, 2018, to fulfill the unexpired term of Yasmin Hamad, whose term expires March 31st, 2018. Further, to recommend Neil Spoonhauer for a new 5-year term beginning April 1st, 2018, and expiring March 31st, 2023.
Great, well done. It's been moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Okay, those 2 recommendations for appointment are made. The next item is the Planning Commission. Before we get into that, are there any changes, additions, deletions to the board packet?
Yes, Mr. Chair, one add and one new nomination, or I guess it'll be an add and a delete. So the one add would be from District 4, John Shellhorse, who's currently on the commission, would be recommended for reappointment or appointment. And then on behalf of Mr. Creasy, Mr. Creasy has asked that I put in Mr. Carter Duke in for nomination to replace Mr. Derek Murray on the board.
And for the board's information, Mr. Murray has done an excellent job serving the board and the citizens on the commission, but he has already served 7 years, and there is an ordinance requirement that he not be allowed, that no member be allowed to serve more than 8. And so that's the only reason for the replacement.
So this 2-year term would put him beyond the
That's
8
correct.
that's the maximum
Right.
allowed.
Right. So just
Okay.
because he has served the planning commission well. I wanted you to understand that
Yeah.
it was a procedural
Absolutely,
issue.
Good.
procedural.
Thank you. Okay, does everybody understand those two changes?
Yes.
All right, if there's no additional questions or discussion, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll go ahead and make a motion that we reappoint John Myers from District 1, Matt Brewer, District 2, Carter Duke, District 3, Tom Rockcharlie, District 5, and Mr. John Shellhorse from District 4, effective April 1, 2018, for a 2-year term with term expirations of March 31, 2020, and that would be for the Goochland Planning Commission.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Okay, those appointments are made. Planning Commission. The next item is the Capital Region Workforce Partnership, CLEO. Sounds like an award. Are there any changes to the?
He's so honored
Sorry.
to receive the Cleo appointment.
Are there any changes to what's in the board packet? Okay, if there's none, then I'll go ahead and entertain a motion on that.
Mr. Chairman, I move to reappoint Mr. Bob Minnick and Mr. Matt Ryan to the Capital Region Workforce Partnership from January 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2019.
And Matt Ryan would be the alternate. Okay,
Right.
good. All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Okay, it's unanimous. That appointment is made. I think we have one more. The Recreation Advisory Commission. Are there any changes to the board packet on the Recreation Advisory Commission? All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to reappoint Betsy Wright, District 1, effective February 6, 2018, for a 2-year term, with a term expiring January 31st, 2020, to the Recreational Advisory Commission.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, nay. Any abstentions? All right, that's unanimous as well. And I just want to take a moment to thank everybody that steps forward. This citizen involvement is critical to the success of this county, and these individuals have stepped forward and volunteered their time and energy to do good work for the county. I just want to thank them again for the willingness to serve. All right, that, I believe it does it for the appointments. The next item is to go into closed meeting, and I believe at this point we need a motion to go into a closed meeting.
The paper, please.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion in accordance with the provisions of Virginia Code 2.2-3711 and 2.2-3712. I move that the Goochland County Board of Supervisors convene in closed meeting for the purpose of discussing the performance and duties of the county attorney as permitted by Virginia Code 2.2-3711A1.
Yes, we moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. We need a roll call vote on this one, please. Thank you.
Ms. Lachlet?
Yes.
Mr. Minnick?
Yes.
Mr. Alvarez?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes. Okay, that is carried. We are going into closed meeting. Just for the citizens' benefit, we do not go into closed meetings very often. There are very specific and limited times in which that's called for. One of those is personnel type issues, and so that's the purpose of this meeting. So with that, we will move into closed meeting. We'll take a 5-minute break before we go into closed meeting. And then following the closed meeting, we'll have a dinner break as well. And then there'll be a 7 p.m. meeting this evening as well. So thank you all for attending, and we'll take a break and go into closed meeting.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to close our closed meeting. Pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3712 parentheses D, I move that the Goochland County Board of Supervisors hereby certify that, to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under the Freedom of Information Act, and I, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the Goochland County Board of Supervisors in the closed meeting.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Give me a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Minnick?
Yes.
Ms. Lachelet?
Yes.
Mr. Alvarez?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes. Okay, that passes unanimously. The closed meeting is over. Now the next item is a dinner break. We'll take a break for dinner and reconvene this evening at 7 p.m. for our evening session. Thank you. County Board of Supervisors meeting on February 6th, 2018. The first item on our agenda for this evening is the citizen comment period. And during the citizen comment period, anyone who'd wish to address this board can come forward to the microphone and speak about any item of Goochland County business, unless it's scheduled for a public hearing. And we have 2 public hearings scheduled for this evening, and we would prefer to hear comments on those public hearings when we open up the public hearings for those items. But on anything else, the citizen comment period would be a period to come forward. Now, I will point out for this evening, there's 3 items on the agenda. The first 2 do have a public hearing, and those will be opened up for citizen comment at that time. The third one, however, is a policy decision by this board, and as such, wouldn't have a public hearing. So if you have comments on item number 3 for this evening, and there won't be a public hearing, you feel free to come forward during the citizen comment period now and make those comments now. But if you have comments about one of the other 2 items that do have a public hearing, we just ask that you bring those comments forward then. Is everybody clear on that? Didn't confuse anybody? Okay. All right, good. Well, with that said, I'll go ahead and open up the citizen comment period. And I'll ask anyone who would like to address this board to come forward on any item other than the 2 public hearings we have scheduled for later on. Anyone like to come forward? And as you're coming forward, I'll just ask you to please state your name and address for the record, and then keep your comments to about 3 minutes. Thank you.
My name is Louise Thompson. I'm a Goshen resident, live at 1930 Soldiers Lodge Road. And I wanted to address the impact study that's coming up that does not have a public hearing involved.
Great, thank you.
And hopefully you'll remember some of the comments that I have as you come to your decision on that. A couple of things I wanted to note. I did read through the impact study, and I give you credit for doing it. It's extremely detailed and extremely thought out with a lot of detail to it. So I hope you all took a few days to look at it and, and go through it. A couple of things that I just wanted to note on that. Figure F9, it noted that Breeze Hill has 131 lots, but it only has 121 lots. So that is a change in the statistic on that. And on that same F9 figure, the Montero Estates will only have 49 lots, not the 54 lots that is listed. And in addition, I wasn't sure because Breeze Hill, for example, is in the Randolph School District and District 4, and we thought that that would be in the eastern section, but it's listed under the central service area. So I just wasn't sure on that discrepancy how that would play. A couple of other things on this number F15 on the school assumptions. I'm not sure if that holds true for all of the neighborhoods in Goshen County, basing it on Henrico County, for example. The school assumption for Lane's End, for example, we have 11 sales in Lane's End so far, and in that, only 2 children are in those households. 2 children, and they're already in the school, the Goshen school districts. They're not moving to a new district. They're not coming from another district. They're already in, so that does not add children to that statistic. And in Breeze Hill, an interesting statistic on Breeze Hill, we've had 19 sales, and so far, out of 19 sales, we only have 2 children in Breeze Hill. The ages are in high school. One of them goes to a private school. One of them will be in the Goshen, or is in the Goshen High School system now. So that's assumption. If we're taking assumptions the way the impact study reads, whether it's the east or the central, the east they have 0.09 per household, central 0.22. With Breeze Hill, for example, or Lanes End rather, with 2 students, that's only a 0.06, which is much less than the assumption that the impact study has. And the same with Breeze Hill. If you take that one high school student that's in Goshen County now, and if he was counted in the current enrollment, that's not a change. But that, even if it's a new student, it's 0.03, which is much less than the assumption of 0.06 and 0.16. So the school student variable might not be totally per se the way the study lays it out to be. I am really concerned about the amount of proffers that is being suggested on the last few figures. They have proffers of over 19,000, 28,000, and 32,000, and that is almost astronomical for this region. Powhatan has $1,932 proffers. Powhatan's another rural county, the same kind of feel as Goshen. Hanover, another county that offers rural housing, $2,306 for proffers. Even Chesterfield County, which a lot of deep Chesterfield has rural properties, $9,000 proffers, $9,400. We are going to be so much higher in proffers. As a real estate agent, that's one of the first things that builders will ask me. Do you have proffers? What are your proffers? I advertise all the time. When I get a lot for sale that has no proffers, that's in all caps, no proffers, because people know they're not spending another $20,000, $30,000, which is their cabinets, their garage, their square footage in the house. That is astronomically going to change the pricing on new houses. And I understand where it's coming from, but I just am so afraid it's going to price the average person out of the market in Goochland. The builders pass it on to the buyers. The builders are not paying for it. The buyers are paying for it. It's a direct cost. And affordable housing is something that everybody in the metro area is concerned about, and we want affordable housing. We don't want Goshen to be just a high-end, high-dollar neighborhood. We want Goshen County to be able, there's so many people now who want to stay in Goshen. They grew up in Goshen. I see it all the time, especially in the central portion. You're still travel time to work. You've still got the schools all right there. It's an incredible opportunity for people to be able to stay in the county. But adding $30-some thousand onto a $300,000 house, the average person isn't going to be able to do it. People are very, very price sensitive, and I urge you to give very careful thought to what you're doing. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you very much for those comments, and thank you for going through the numbers. If you have some specific numbers that you went through in the beginning very quickly with some cleanup numbers or questionable, if you could just touch base with county staff and just make sure that they have those numbers that you cited, that would be helpful. So thank you. Anyone else like to come forward in citizen comment period? And okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the citizen comment period. Okay, as I mentioned this evening, we've got excuse me, 2 public hearings, and then item number 3 as well. The first, and by the way, for those that are here for the first time, or maybe some veterans, just to remind you, we have a process that we generally follow, which goes something like this. The staff will come forward and make a presentation about the application. And then if there's an applicant, the applicant will come forward. In this case, there's not. After which we open it up to a public hearing, and then anyone will be able to come up and speak in favor or against, or just provide comments. And then the board will engage in discussion and then consider the item for decision. So that's generally the process that we follow here. So the first one, I believe Ms. McGee is going to present, which is a ordinance amendment to bring us back in, or I guess give us the maximum flexible under the current state law.
That's correct. What's
okay.
Before you in the resolution is an amendment to one of our purchasing ordinances. It's section 11-28 of County Code, and it has to do with architectural or professional engineering service contracts. We are allowed to and do use an on-call engineering service contract where we have a number of folks who've accepted our proposal, and we use them sort of in order. And all the proposed amendment does is the old state law used to limit the per project cost of any one project to $100,000, but it got raised more than a year ago to $150,000. We didn't put that into place at the time, but we would like to, so that we can fully use our on-call engineering appropriately. So that's what's before you for consideration.
So this would bring us in conformity with state law.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Any questions for Ms. McGee? The ordinance amendment and the resolution are in the package. All right, none at this time. Then we'll go ahead and open up a public hearing. Anyone who would like to come forward and speak in favor or against, or just share some thoughts on this ordinance amendment, now would be the time to do so. 3, 2, 1. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Board, any discussion, thoughts, or questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the ordinance amendment as presented by Ms. McGee.
Okay, it's been moved. Do we have a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded. Ms. Badesky, can we do a roll call vote on this?
Mr. Minnick?
Yes.
Mr. Alvarez?
Yes.
Ms. Lachelette?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes. Okay, it's unanimous. That ordinance amendment is approved. Okay, the next item up, Mr. Stamey will walk us through an amendment to the comprehensive land use plan.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Derek Stamey, Deputy County Administrator for Operations. Tonight, I've got an overview of the proposed Public Facilities Master Plan. That plan provides recommendations that address service needs for the county for the next 5 to 25 years. The plan provides recommendations for facility needs for the following functions for county government, including public utilities, general government functions, public safety, parks and recreation, public schools, solid waste services, technology, and libraries. The plan does the following per each of those functions. It provides an overview of our existing facilities, provides a methodology for needs assessments and levels of services that influence our decision-making, provides locational criteria for that decision-making, provides recommendations for future facility development, including brief descriptions of all the projects that are found within the plan. The plan also provides implementation strategies for each facility. All of those implementation strategies are found at the end of each section for each function. It also provides maps and illustrations of existing facilities as well as potential future locations. It does not provide specific locations, but it identifies corridors and potential locations for facilities. It provides access at the end of the document to an up-to-date inventory of facilities. The plan does not do the following. It does not address project funding or other financial issues related to the individual project. It does not address operational items such as staffing, design, or equipment. It does not assign priorities to project sequencing. It does not assign specific locations for facility development. It simply provides a generalized location. For the function of general government, public safety, and courts, we utilized the recently completed space study, as well as utilized a needs assessment and levels of service standards to identify recommendations for facility development or redevelopment for general government, public safety, and courts. Through that process, we were able to identify deficits, both significant and mild, that could be addressed or is aimed to be addressed through the Public Facilities Master Plan. In addition to that, we utilize standardized goals, desired response times, and locational criteria for fire and rescue services. Recommendations for general government, public safety, and courts included a new combined courts building, as well as a consolidated sheriff operations, expanded or renovated space for our registrar, our commissioner of revenue, our treasurer, assessor, and human service related functions. Recommendations also included new fire station locations in areas that would increase the overall effectiveness and reduce response times. The two maps in front of you are an illustration of our current coverage areas, the map on the left, and potential future coverage areas. You can see how the blue and the red with the existing fire station locations overlap, and response times and coverage areas are increased. This is an example of an illustration found within the plan itself. For public utilities, the plan references needs assessments and existing planned infrastructure identified in the Public Utilities Master Plan. Recommendations include supporting projects found within the existing Public Utilities Master Plan and continuing to develop the TCSD appropriately and support projects found within the 25-year CIP. Again, this is an example of some of the maps and features that can be found within the Public Facility Master Plan document. Parks and Recreation. The Public Facility Master Plan utilized data obtained from the Parks and Recreation 5-year Master Plan, which included an analysis of both citizen feedback and a combination of the Virginia Outdoor Plan service levels for recreational amenities. Recommendations included new parks and trail systems in the eastern end of the county, as well as the expansion of existing park facilities countywide. The following is an illustration or a map of the county that shows the different corridors that were targeted for public facilities. The new facilities are the corridors that are outlined with a box, and the green circles highlight areas where current amenities exist or planned amenities exist. Public schools. The Public Facility Master Plan relied heavily upon the Goochland County Public Schools Long-Term Facility Master Plan, and that information relied heavily on their capacity analysis, their current building conditions and life cycles, their future enrollment data, and extensive citizen engagement. All of that was included as part of the school space study. Recommendations included ongoing maintenance and improvements of their current facilities, 3 new replacement elementary schools, and improvements to the high and middle school complex. Public Facilities Master Plan also identifies the need for additional services as far as solid waste services in the eastern end of the county. Currently, there is no solid waste services in the eastern portion of the county. There is a Western Convenience Center and a Central Convenience Center. Here's a map that demonstrates a corridor. Again, it doesn't identify a specific location for a convenience center, but it does outline potential locations in that box. Technology. The master plan identifies the need for the county to pursue communication improvements countywide and identifies methodologies to improve our internal technological services. As far as libraries, the Public Facilities Master Plan utilized the Library of Virginia levels of service standards as well as locational criteria in its recommendations. The recommendation includes an Eastern Goochland library. As you can see, the library level of service standards is based upon a minimum level of service as it applies to a square footage ratio versus your population. Currently, we underserve our population as it pertains to that ratio. Again, an eastern library location is highlighted with a rectangle versus a specific location. At their January 4th, 2018 meeting, the Planning Commission received the same presentation that you've received this evening, and they recommended approval of the plan amendment with a 5-0 vote. And staff is requesting that the Board of Supervisors hold a public hearing and take action on the amendment of the 2035 County Comprehensive Plan with the addition of the Public Facilities Master Plan. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stamey.
Yes, sir.
Any questions for? Nothing at this point? Okay. Thank you. Nicely done. Okay, the next step would be to go ahead and open up a public hearing. We'll go ahead and open up a public hearing on this amendment to the comprehensive plan. Anyone would like to come forward and address us on this ordinance amendment, proposed amendment, please do so now. 3, 2, 1. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Any additional thoughts or discussion? No? Okay. Good job, Mr. Stamey. Looks like you did a great job addressing all the questions before they were asked. So at this time, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the comprehensive plan, the modifications to add the revised public facilities plan.
This is Chapter 6?
Chapter 6.
Okay. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Mr. Badesky, roll call vote, please.
Ms. Lachelette?
Yes.
Mr. Alvarez?
Yes.
Mr. Minnick?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes. Okay, unanimous, that passes. We now have a Chapter 6 in our comprehensive plan. Thank you for all the hard work that was done on that. Okay, next item on our agenda is item number 3, the capital impacts model presentation and consideration of a resolution to amend the Proffer policy. Ms. Hunter?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Joanne Hunter, Director of Community Development. We're very excited to present to you tonight the capital impact model presentation. We've been working on this for about 4 months. It's required a lot of different building blocks that have come before you during this 4-month time frame. We've done the 25-year CIP, the adoption of the public facility plan, numerous meetings, and lots of work by all the different agencies and your support. So we're very excited. We did commit to the development community that we would have this before them on February 6th. So we're glad to be presenting this to you on time. Did want to remind you what the objective of the capital impact study and model is. It's a model to be used as a planning tool to quantify the capital costs generated by all new development in the county. This board's committed to having tools and processes to effectively evaluate the potential impacts of growth. In order to do this, we had to hire Tischler Bice. They are a nationally known fiscal and economic analysis consultant who prepared the capital impact study. They do this type of study and fiscal analysis throughout the United States. And they have worked very hard to prepare this study based on the information we've provided to them. This study and model will allow the county to calculate the capital impacts of new development by land use. So I know a lot of people think of residential impacts, but all development has some sort of impact and some sort of cost to the county, whether it's residential or commercial. This model will allow us to look at both. So we, as you have more people, more businesses, there's more people using the roads, there's more people using sheriff, there's more people using fire. So people think that sometimes there's only cost to a residential development. There's also cost to commercial development, and this model will also look at that. There are revenues projected with all that type of development. This model doesn't look at the revenues, but as a county, we've done a good job of tracking revenue. You saw it today that when we had the economic development update, you saw it with the assessment update. So we've been tracking revenue, but we've never really understood what are the costs of development. Now with this model, we will now know what those costs are. So the study and model will provide citizens, staff, the Planning Commission, and the board with data and information about the anticipated impacts development will have on the public facilities. So the study looks at the following facilities: public safety, which includes sheriff, fire, and animal control; public schools, roads, parks and recreation, courts, convenience centers, general government, and libraries. So the study provides for each one of those categories analysis of the level of service, review of planned facilities, capacity, and impacts for each one of those categories. And then the study, which is in your packets, a little over 100 pages, that's all the data, and all that is linked to a model. The model is a user-friendly spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet, that the county will be able to manipulate and use in the future. It's very easy to use. We can input information, whether it's number of lots, square footage for commercial development, and it would output information for all of these categories of what the impacts are. So that's basically what that says. The capital impact study and model will allow the county to make data-driven decisions and improve its ability to engage in long-term planning. It's going to be a planning tool to allow the county to continue to provide high-quality core services to our residents, and it will also provide additional transparency to county citizens about the impacts of all new development. So at this time, I want to turn it over to Tischler Bice. Here tonight we have Julie Herlands and Colin McEweeny, who both worked on the study and model, and they'll go into the study in much more detail.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hunter. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm happy to be with you this evening and I do have a presentation, and it will come up shortly. Of course. Couldn't have a 100-page document without a presentation to go along with it.
Right.
So.
Well, welcome, and thank you for coming out tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Okay, as Ms. Hunter mentioned, my name is Julie Herlands. I'm Vice President with Tischler Bice, and she did mention some of our experience. I've been with the firm coming up on 15-year anniversary this spring. Worked in 25 states around the country, doing really what we call cost of growth services. So looking at what is the cost of development, a lot of times looking at the revenues as well, but really focusing on quantifying those costs for development. I personally have done a lot of work in Virginia on some cash proffer studies before the change in the legislation, but also capital impacts analysis. And the firm itself has been around about 40 years now, really focusing on those types of issues. We're all planners and finance folks, but really that connection between municipal finance, governmental finance, and land use decisions, making that connection. So in terms of the presentation this evening, I'll give a brief overview of the study and the model itself, kind of talk through some of the key data assumptions. There was citizen comment earlier on the study, and we can address a couple of those items. Go over the model overview, and then kind of walk you through each of the calculations. Once we get through the first couple, it kind of goes pretty quickly. I know it's a pretty lengthy presentation, but it'll go relatively quickly, kind of getting the feel for our approach, how we look at levels of service, how we quantify the costs, and then use that in the model, and then open up for questions and discussion. So as Ms. Hunter mentioned, there's really kind of a twofold purpose for the study, for the effort. To come up with a study that quantifies on a static basis what are the capital impacts for growth, both on the residential and non-residential side, and looking at the differences between and among the different types of development, because not all residential has the same characteristics, so we quantify what those drivers are. And then the second part, which Ms. Hunter mentioned as well, is this dynamic model that staff can then use to identify, on a case-by-case basis, identify what those capital costs are. And in part to address the need to comply with the new cash proffer legislation that asks for, or that calls for, the need to identify what the reasonable cash proffer amount is. And there's lots of those kinds of criteria in there in terms of what reasonable is, one of which is there capacity or is there not capacity. And so this model has those triggers in there. So those static amounts are not the amounts ultimately that would be output from this model, and I'll kind of walk you through that part. We mentioned the capital impact categories that are covered, and we kind of split them into the cash proffer eligible categories, because those are the types of categories that, well, you've had sort of cash proffer policy prior, but kind of splitting them now and saying, okay, these are the ones that are identified in the new law, but then really what are the capital impacts across the board that link back to the public facilities plan, the 25-year CIP. So they're really, broad brush in terms of capital impacts to the county from new development. Part of our approach is it's a big county in terms of geography, lots of different characteristics in the different areas of the county. So we're really looking at two service areas that are similar but slightly different. So for all facility categories but schools, we divide the county into an east, central, west. We're using the same terminology, but with a east elementary school, central elementary school, west elementary school, which is this next slide. And so as part of the model to determine the capital impacts, there's a drop-down menu that says, where is the project located for public facility category, east, central, west? Where is it located for public schools, east, with the each Goochland, west, central, west, et cetera. So we're identifying where those specific needs are, and then as part of the analysis as well, establishing the need, that there are growth-related needs. That's evident in your 25-year CIP, but to quantify really what it looks like in terms of population growth, employment growth here in the county. And so we did use those pipeline numbers that were referenced in the citizen comment, and that's really to give a sense of that sort of the short and medium term amount of growth and using those to do projections. And so they are projections, and so a few units here and there are really not going to change the analysis, going to change the approach. Likely those numbers will not even really change the and dollar amounts either. But if there were big changes in the future, those are the kinds of things we would want to update as you go forward. The other key piece, there's a couple other key drivers to quantify the demand, to allocate demand in terms of the residential development, looking at household size. So we want to make that distinction between different types of residential units, single family, multifamily, and then an age-restricted single family category that will have a different impact. And then the other key driver, as well accustomed to, is student generation rates, and there's lots of work done by the school board in terms of their planning and their quantification of their demand. And I should note too, there's another comment about in terms of the students generating or being generated off of certain developments, and this is meant to be over the life of the unit. So this is really looking at when a unit's built, you're going to have kids that event born, age out, empty nesters, so it is meant to be the rate over the life of a unit, an average rate. So it may be at the front end that you don't have that many, or you have a lot, and then as the unit gets older, and it all depends. I've worked in lots of different communities where it really does depend, where you might have older units with lots of kids, or older units with no kids, so it does depend on the economics of the situation of the community. But it is meant to be an average rate over the life of the unit. So those units that are getting built now, maybe they don't have kids now, but eventually maybe they will. But it is something you should and they track, and the county has been diligent about doing that over time. So I just wanted to show a couple screenshots of the model itself. There's going to be some, small type. It's not meant to be, details not meant to be read, but just get a feel for what the model looks like. This is an example of this is the input page, basically naming the project. Again, those are drop downs of the service areas, what school region, those kinds of things. Ms. Hunter mentioned inputting the number of units, inputting the square footage of the non-residential development. And then, again, not meant to see the details, but just terms of what the data is in there, and looking at different categories, main categories of facilities and the outputs, and we really are looking at what's the capital impact, what's that cost, and then is there a capacity trigger, and if there's a capacity trigger, what does that cost entail? What does that cost look like? So it's kind of a drill down type of a menu. You get to an output of which then staff can use these and put them into their staff reports, or just for internal use, but really looking at, here's a summary of the project, and then what are those capital impacts? And it really is sort of a step down approach. There's a capital impact, then there's for everything, and then there's a cash proffer eligible amount, and then or categories, and then there's where there's capacity needed. So it's sort of this: you start at a number and kind of drill your, walk your way down the outputs. And this is just zoomed in on that result. And this is just a hypothetical example in terms of getting some numbers. And we do have, again, all categories here covered that we've talked about. So next part of the presentation is really to walk you through the approach, some of the data, and we've just divided it again into kind of two parts of these cash proffer eligible categories. Again, not meant to be static cash proffer amounts. We're not there. It's different now. These are just the categories for which there's an eligibility for cash proffers. So I don't want to give that impression. We'll start with schools, biggie. So we're looking at we're looking at future plans for additional capacity, both at the elementary and high school. And the demand generator here is that student generation rate, and we do include a credit for outstanding debt, property taxes that are paid on outstanding debt. You want to double pay in terms of someone potentially paying if they do pay cash proffer. So this is just a snapshot from the future plans for additional capacity. both, again, at elementary school and high school. There are currently no middle school projects in the pipeline, so there is no middle school cost associated here or included here. And then just to give sort of what you're looking at when you're looking at the report. The driver here, again, is that student generation rate. That's the driver, multiplied by ultimately the net capital cost per student. And this is derived through all of those steps down through the plan. What's the cost per student? Getting down to that bottom line gray of net capital cost per student, again, subtracting out that principal payment credit to get to the static, what is the capital impact for different type of unit in each of these service areas for our school service areas, the east, the central, and the west. And those numbers are driven by the projects in those areas and the student generation rates in those areas. There's higher student generation rates in central and west, and those numbers then reflect that. Moving on to Parks and Recreation, also looking at the capital improvement plan. There are some facilities that are really countywide type facilities that really have a draw and a service area that's a countywide service area. Other that are by specific service area, by our east, central, and west service areas. You'll see on the screen there service area distinction or the use of service areas. We do that for district parks, community parks, walking trails, and then a countywide service area for regional parks, the indoor recreational facilities, and multi-use trails. And the population here is the driver for these improvements, for these capacity improvements. This is a summary of the capital improvement plan on which the capital impacts are based, and you'll see that we have it, again, divided by service area with the planned improvements and those costs to get to the drivers, the cost drivers there, and then a summary of the levels of service, again, by type of facility, whether it's countywide service area, what the current level of service is, and then where there's a capacity trigger. And I mentioned earlier, the model builds that, has built that in, so that when there's a capacity need in specific service area, it gets triggered, a cost gets triggered there. Just a summary of the other component, the multi-use trails. It's included here, which is a countywide facility. And then this is a summary of where those capacity needs are by type of facility. So just sort of a snapshot of which service areas. So you'll see for district parks, there's a deficit where there's capacity needs in east, the central service area, but not on the west. So that just gives a flavor of where those capital impacts are triggered, which are then ultimately potentially cash proffer eligible. And then the bottom line summary of the static dollar amounts of what is the capital impact to serve each of these types of housing units within, again, the service areas. So we have first the east, then central, then west. And some, again, there's some countywide costs included, some that are service area specific. Okay, moving on to the sheriff. In this case, this is what we call an incremental methodology, looking at what the current level of service is today, and identifying what the capital impact is to provide that same current level of service in the future. So for sheriff facilities, for additional sheriff facilities. This is both a residential and a non-residential generator. So there's services demanded from non-residential growth for public safety services, and it is a countywide service area. So in terms of the current level of service, we allocate the residential and non-residential by calls for service. So sheriff calls for service, the split between those that go to residential addresses and those that go to non-residential addresses, in a way to allocate the costs there. And again, level of service is based on the current demand base in terms of population and jobs. There is this is the capital impact, but currently there are no additional capacity projects in the long-term CIP, the short-term or long-term CIP. So again, this is a snapshot of what are the capital impacts to serve different types of development, but it is would not be triggered as part of a ultimate, a cash proffer calculation because there's no projects that will provide additional capacity. So that kind of this, I think, delineates between we got capital impacts. Here's the cost to serve, but yet may not trigger. It would not trigger a cost in terms of a cash proffer calculation. On the fire and rescue capital impacts approach, this is a plan-based methodology which uses again the CIP for fire stations, fire apparatus, and support facilities. It's done by service areas, and it does provide services to residential and non-residential development. And this is a summary of the capital improvement plan, again, by service area. The fire training center is also included in the CIP, and that's a county-wide facility that will provide services countywide. And then our level of service analysis, looking at whether there's deficits by geographic area, where those needs are, again, where that capacity trigger is. And then we do the same thing for the apparatus by service area, by our service area, central, east, and west. And a summary of the support facilities as well. And this is the same approach here on fire for fire and EMS, where we use calls for service split between residential and non-residential. And you'll see the numbers are different here in terms of demand from residential versus non-residential. For fire and EMS calls for service 6337, which is different than the sheriff's. They are specific to the service. And then a summary for residential of the capital impacts, the dollar amounts, again, the static dollar amounts, where there may or may not be capacity triggers depending on the service area that it's serving, and then the non-residential summary as well. And these I should note, I'm not sure I noted this before, but on the non-residential side is per 1,000 square feet is the dollar amount. So if you wanted to reduce it to a per square foot amount, if that was if so inclined, just divide by 1,000. And then the final subcategory for public safety is animal protection. This is a plan-based approach that's driven by population growth. So the new animal shelter is included in the capital impacts model. It's the one that's currently under construction is replacing an older shelter, and it's built for future demand. However, because there are no future capacity projects at this time, it's not technically cash proffer eligible. It's already in the works. So in terms of capacity, future additional capacity needs at this time, it's not included. And then the summary here again of the capital impacts by type of housing unit. Does get a bit repetitive, but we wanted to make sure you had all of the numbers in front of you as we go through this, and happy to answer questions at the end of any of the details. And so then moving to transportation, this is a plan-based methodology of capacity road improvement projects, and these are road improvement projects that the county anticipates funding. The county will put county dollars into. So that is a specific distinction. Roads typically in Virginia, were someone else's or the state's purview for a while, but you've been down that road, so to speak. That that more and more, particularly capacity needs and improvements, intersection improvements, those kinds of things, more system level improvements, really needing those county funding. So this is on residential and non-residential. This is something that serves both residential and non-residential development for sure, and we do again use service areas here. So this is a summary of the east improvements, road improvement, capacity road improvement projects in the east service area. This is looking at both accommodating current and future demands. So our denominator, what we're saying is these costs are going to serve everyone in the future. It's not just over net new growth. And so that is spreading the costs over over all users, current and future. And then planned improvements for central and west service areas here. Also included in the calculation are intersection improvements, and this is, again, by service area, those improvements that are, and these are system level improvements, not project specific, not specific to a turn lane into a project, but really these collector level roads that are carrying vehicles through either through the county, across the county, from development to development, and the same goes for the intersection improvements that are really system level improvements that provide additional capacity system wide. And then again, finally, the summary of the capital impacts by type of land use, both residential and non-residential here. Then the second part of the presentation on, again, the rest of the facilities that are not now included in the cash proffer legislation. So this includes library, general government, courts, environmental services, those convenience centers. So in libraries, there are plans for additional capacity for libraries. It is driven by population and a countywide service area. The screen shows the planned improvements, the anticipation that it will serve through the 25-year CIP period, that both a new library and an expansion of a current library, and again the capital impacts by type of housing unit. This is just on residential development, so we're just showing capital. Just have the residential cost per residential units. Clicker's getting tired. It's not responding anymore. Then on general government capital improvements approach, there are no projects here. We looked at no projects in the CIP, so this is really an incremental methodology again. Kind of the same approach we took with sheriffs. Here's your current level of service. This is the space we're providing today. This is could change in the future. There's public facilities plan mention of additional space for general government purposes. And so while right now it's at incremental expansion, this may change in the future. But again, it's not cash proffer eligible. But there are capital impacts to serve at this level of service, and this is the split here, and the capital impacts by type of land use, both residential and non-residential. The court's capital improvement, there is a project on the horizon, and I guess we didn't put the actual project in, but the cost, future cost is split between, again, residential, non-residential, and cost per person and job calculated, and a capital impacts by type of land use again. And then our final category is environmental services. There are planned projects here. That the component here is the new convenience sites. It's a countywide service area. The users and the demand is population. This is a summary of the capital improvement plan, and allocated over future population for a bottom line capital impact by type of land use. That completes the prepared presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. That was very comprehensive and very detailed, and a lot of information. It's kind of like taking a drink of water off a fire hose. You know you're thirsty, but you get a lot of information all at once. Questions by the board? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, Mr. Edwards, like to kick us off.
Okay. One of the questions that was brought up by Ms. Thompson was a question about the number of homes on figure 9. How does that impact the model?
Yeah.
Because there are some differences, and I think some of the subdivisions were originally approved, but the numbers changed over time.
Sure.
How does that impact the model?
Yeah, not very much. We did use those pipeline projects, and they were current as of 2016. So it was a point in time when we essentially took our data, but used them to in our projections, our future projections, and then converted that to population. So if anything, our 2042 population, which we've used in a lot of the calculations, it may change by a couple, 5 people or so, but the dollar amounts really are not going to be materially impacted. If there were substantial changes in terms, hundreds of units that were expected in the pipeline, but it is a projection, and we've used that in the timing of those pipeline units. We've assumed over a 10-year period, and then projected out from there, and they are projections. So I mean, take that with what you. Yeah.
And is that something that the county planning folks can modify?
Yes.
It's a dynamic model, so
Correct.
it can be modified to adjust. The other question was about the school zoning, and looking at the map, you can see that the neighborhood that Ms. Thompson talked about is, I guess the children there go to school at Randolph.
Mm-hmm.
How do you apply that? They're located in the central section based on central service, but the kids attend school in the eastern. How do we work that out?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. The model itself, when selecting where the impact is, the model does reflect the school boundaries, the elementary school boundaries. With those units, we'll just need to confirm and just to confirm in terms of whether those that pipeline number was in our projections, but we were using cooperative strategies projections, so we would just need to just doubly confirm, but it's not going to affect the model itself and the functioning of the model. And there's elementary school capacity needs across the board, right? So those are regardless. So you're going to have a capacity need in both of those districts, east and central, regardless of where those units were.
And the model that you fit.
Yeah.
Okay.
The drop
Can I
down.
follow on that one for just a second, if I could? You can organize your notes there. But so if a project comes in, you mentioned drop-down menus. Can you pick and say I'm in the eastern school, but the central fire and safety and the western library? Can you, by service, select where it is to customize the project, or is it?
Yes. In the 2 distinctions are the schools zones and then everything else. Okay. Because the everything else we've organized, which is makes it very streamlined. We did a similar effort in Fauquier County. It was not as streamlined, and so there were many different of categories. But this case, it's sort of one group for schools, the drop down, and then everything else.
Okay,
yeah.
so you do tell the model where I am for schools and then where I am for everything else.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more question, but it's not escaping me.
Mr. Peterson, can I just clarify? Part of the reason we had to do that, and we haven't really gotten into the Proffer law, and you're going to hear more about your policy, there's language regarding specifically attributable. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about that a number of times. We had to look at areas of impact, unlike where the old plan and old Proffer policy allowed us to look comprehensively across the county. These zones were in part to address that specific part of the law. And that's why you will see different calculations for different zones in the county. It's not across the board the same dollar amounts any longer. It's because there's different costs associated with specifically attributable projects in their areas.
Correct.
One more,
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Chairman.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the questions, this may be for Joanne or our attorney. If a neighborhood is already zoned, this does not impact them, correct? It's grandfathered?
That's correct.
Unless they come for a rezoning or...
Right, and again, that's if you're looking at it only with the purpose of determining, under today's law, a reasonable cash proffer. This also has that broader perspective of when homes that were rezoned 5 years ago are built, what is the impact to the county overall? And those numbers are still accurate for looking at unbuilt, but they're not things that you would be recovering from a developer, which those are those two different long-range planning piece and then an opportunity to determine reasonableness of cash proffers in new zoning cases. Two separate.
Answer?
Nothing for now.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I just want to make sure it doesn't get lost. You focused very clearly on proffer eligible categories and non-proffer eligible. Historically, we never looked at the development impacts this way. We had a proffer policy that was specific to the way the law was written and calculated against those particular categories. We never looked at the total impact of a development, and there was a cost to it, we just never calculated it. And some of those were never proffer eligible under the old law, we just never calculated it. So you are seeing calculations for the total cost impact, but it's not necessarily equates to what we're the development community, the number that would be a reasonable cash proffer under this type of model. So the total number certainly is substantially, is collectively higher, but the proffer eligible number would be different. And one of the things that we intentionally did in the plan was, and it's at the back because there's a lot of numbers and methodology in here, under Appendix A, there were examples of a like 50 home subdivision being proposed in different areas of the community. And I think it's an important example because depending on where you sit on cash proffers, someone just wants to say, okay, tell me what mine would cost. And so we tried to come up with a like development, and those costs are in Appendix A, which is starts on page 103 of the report. I think it's important to note there, under the old model, that dollar amount would have been identical for any home anywhere in the county. And based on the reasons we just discussed earlier, it is completely different in all three areas.
Great, thank you for that. It is an important distinction. What you've just walked us through is a model or a methodology, but it's not a number. In the past, our proffer policy had a number attached to it.
Right.
This model doesn't have a number attached to it. It's really a methodology.
Right.
And you'll have a different answer depending on the different inputs.
Correct.
So it's a specifically attributable type model. Okay. Other questions at this point?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. And so, besides Goochland, where else in Virginia is this model, or have you worked on this model? What other localities?
The most recent is Fauquier County, and it really is in response to the change in the cash proffer law. So prior to that, we've done, numerous cash proffer studies, as Mr. Chairman was mentioning, in terms of the previous iteration of what a cash proffer study and policy would look like, where there is a static amount. But we've done, actually we did the Goochland cash proffer study prior to this effort, but this is a relatively new effort. Not to say that we don't have fiscal models in other communities as well, including the City of Falls Church, City of Alexandria. We're doing one for Loudoun County currently, and other places outside of Virginia as well. So it's a similar modeling effort, but as Joanne mentioned, there's revenues associated with it as well, and then there's operating costs and capital as well. This is just specifically the capital cost part of it.
Right, this one's just specifically the cost part.
Capital cost.
Yeah. I think, which also is probably another important point to bring up, and I think we've probably talked about this before, is the revenue piece on here. The other side of the balance sheet is not really, we haven't compared that yet. This is just purely just the model perspective, one side of the balance sheet in my mind. Yeah,
and it's really only one portion of that one side. This is the capital cost. So this does not include any maintenance or ongoing operational annual. This is really just capital costs driven by square feet, population, different drivers. But so it doesn't even include the operating costs. So it doesn't include revenues or the operating costs, just the capital costs. Okay. Ms. Lascolette, do you
Oh, yeah. You gotta be kidding. Well, thank you very much. I know this is a tremendous amount of work, and we really appreciate what you've done and our staff has done. I believe on page 18 of your presentation, you began to talk about the triggers. And I think I understand it, but rather than embarrass myself and try to explain it, would you tell us again what we mean by that when we reach capacity?
Sure.
Just to make, can we pull up page 18, or is that?
Pull up page 18.
Can we pull up?
I think it's
page
where
18,
she
or is
started.
that
Yeah, it's
just for the citizens.
You could have said it, those words before that.
right. And I
Or is
and
that-
and I
or
and
does
I
she have
and
control?
honestly, and that slide itself
have
is
control?
not going to really illustrate.
so
I don't
maybe
think
that's
that'll
not the
illustrate,
right
and I don't think we have. And to be, and I don't. And there really isn't a.
Okay.
The report.
Ms. Lascaux, were you referring to the? Ms. Lascaux, were you referring to the board packet or the
No, I was
presentation?
referring to her presentation.
Yeah.
I wonder
I
if-
may
And
have
it-
written down the wrong
right.
page.
Right, and it
Let's see.
is the, in terms of schools, and that's sort of the where I start. That's that section that we was talking about, that where there's the trigger, meaning where there's capacity needs today. So, and from the development that gets analyzed. And so, and I mentioned before that elementary schools are currently over capacity. And so the trigger is, is there enrollment, currently is enrollment greater than capacity for your current seats, then that's a trigger that says you as a county do not have additional elementary school seats to provide that capacity. On the high school side, it's a different story. So while you might have a plan in place where there's a capital impact, ultimately, if there's currently capacity in the system, that the model, how we've designed it, is that it will not trigger that capacity need because there's enrollment is under capacity today.
Right.
So there are those triggers built in that say, is it over capacity? Yes. Then there's a trigger for that cash proffer eligible cost. And again, not to say that there's not a capital impact. A new student's going to occupy a seat, and there's a cost to the county, but is it cash proffer eligible? The cash proffer law says if there's existing capacity, then that's not eligible. Or it's still an eligible category, but it's not
Doesn't
reasonable.
come into play into
Right.
this model.
Right.
That's, okay, I was be sure I was clear and understood that.
Yep.
And let me just finish up on the example that Julie used. So nowhere do you actually see the middle school, because
Right.
the middle school has capacity.
Right.
Moreover, in our 25-year CIP, there's no plan to build any additional
Right.
capacity. So the middle school falls out of a particular, in the model, it falls out of being calculated for cash proffer because of the capacity.
Okay, that makes sense. I'll be sure I was clear on that. Mr. Chairman, to continue, so therefore, as we add more students to a particular school, let's say it is the high school, right now it's under capacity, so it doesn't trigger, but then over time, we're adding more students to the school. So how does it adjust, and we will adjust this over time to take that into account, right?
Correct.
Okay.
There is a page of demand indicators,
Okay.
inputs that staff will update, ideally on a yearly basis, and we'll actually do a training with them as well, and we'll have a user manual that goes along with the model.
Okay, so
we'll
that
know how to do it.
stays current and.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
And one last very simple question. Under the sheriff, it was showing an 80-20 split between residential and commercial. Is that from our numbers, or is that like a general number?
Those are local Goochland
Okay.
County numbers.
Thank you. All right.
That,
I'm
that it?
good
Okay,
now.
for now,
I
okay.
reserve my right.
Of course. Julie, I've just had a couple real quick ones here. Overall, this model is designed to, for lack of a better word, preserve the current level of service. It's not designed to enhance the level of service in any area. It's just a matter of preserving the level of service we have now. As growth materializes, as development materializes, as population increases, it's designed to maintain our current level of service. Is that a fair characterization, or?
It is in terms of the capital improvement plan that was developed and adopted, to the extent that those projects potentially increase the level of service. New Growth is paying their fair share of, or allocated their fair share of that cost, where the county then is committing to make up that higher level service for existing development. So the example is, and it doesn't even come in play with the cash proffers, but the libraries, where there's a current level of service today, there's a goal for a higher level of service. With the projects in there, you get closer, but that cost is a per person cost that you're saying, if you build this facility, you're going to provide that higher level of service for everybody. And it doesn't even come in play with the cash proffers anyway, but but still, it's that a fair share from allocated New Growth.
So it's driven by the CIP.
Correct. For the most part, but the intent is to keep it at a level service continuously.
And let me provide you one other perspective too, and that is, for instance, for the sheriff, okay, as new residents come in, there is more demand on the sheriff, but our 25-year CIP does not have a capacity construction increase for the sheriff. So there, in some respects, because there's no plan to build, there's nothing going into the cash proffer. So actually your level of service for the sheriff will in some ways degrade, right, because new residents won't be contributing to that until the point in time when there might be a plan to add capacity, and then that becomes an eligible cash proffer. So in certain instances, I mean, if we don't have a plan to build it today, then that's fine. You're sort of, the level of service that anything will go down a little bit, but that's appropriate until we reach the point where we're committing to make a plan to build more capacity. And that's one of those things that the new cash proffer law was designed to sort of do, to drop out anything that you're not planning to construct, to not have those be eligible.
Okay, good. To follow on that concept, let's say we have a school that's half full, and that 10 years from now in our CIP is a new school because we anticipate the current school will exceed capacity, and there'll be a trigger. How would that work into the model? If a school is half full today, but during the 25-year plan, it's going to be over capacity, and there's a new school in the plan. How does that, do you present value the cost of that 10-year out school build, or how does that play into the model?
Well, the costs are current dollars today, and those should be updated. And this comes into play in terms of the updating of the model as plans change, as costs change. That should be usually the cost elements are really a 2 to maybe a 3 year update where our communities would then go in and kind of revisit those assumptions, the plans, the costs. You can do what we typically advise our clients a lot of times is to do an escalator, a construction cost index of some sort, which I think you probably did on your previous policy, right. And that you can do that in the interim, and then once there's sort of changes that gets updated. Okay,
so the model uses current cost, comes up with a number, and then that number then itself is has an adjustment over time for increased cost of construction, that kind of thing. Right. Okay.
But Mr. Fisher, there was another sort of embedded question that I think we're going to hear elsewhere. Okay. If you have half a capacity, but yet 15 years from now you have another one, if there's capacity today and someone walks in, they're not going to have that fee. It's for when we run out of that capacity is when that charge would be applied.
That trigger.
Right, the trigger.
So for instance, I think this is true, though Julie's going to jump in if I get it wrong. When we were talking about the high school, which is currently under capacity by maybe 100 students. If we got a phenomenally large development that was going to throw off a lot of students, right now today, the model, if you triggered 102 students from this development, would say, well, wait a minute, those cash proffer eligible 2 student seats.
Right. Triggers the capacity.
Right. But not the 100. Right. And keep in mind that the other thing that the model does not do, and it's not clear to me that state law today allows us to do, if you had 3 developers coming through tonight, all of whom were throwing off 100 high school students, they all could claim those empty 100 seats tonight, because there's no way to take into account a generation that's going to come from approved but unbuilt homes. So that's just a fact of the current state law.
Right.
But you update the model as homes get built, and so you you get to reach the point where that shows as needing capacity, but you don't get to do it in the same evening.
Right.
So as I understand it, it won't trigger the capacity to start looking at cash proffers until after the need for the facility already is upon us.
Mm-hmm.
I think as a practical matter,
Then
that's
how do you
correct.
finance the building of that?
I
Okay.
assume you write your General Assembly member for a donation.
So let me get this straight, Mr. Chairman. So we have 2,600 approximately rooftops that have been previously approved. So from previous boards and up to about what, a year ago. So, and some of those are under, so the students that they would in theory throw off based on their category of home in that 2,600 would not be counted against the new model for if, in your scenario, three other developers came in tonight and we're going to additionally cast off, in your scenario, another 100 students per residential development. So
This is my favorite question. Get my soapbox out.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
In essence, we could be significantly underestimating our capital requirements for, school facilities, even with this model.
Well, and
Maybe.
perhaps
Yeah.
the nice part about that in some respects is that Julie's model shows you capital impacts, and then it shows you what you could judge a reasonable cash proffer against. And there is a delta there. And some of that delta is, this 100 students that you can't, wouldn't be reasonable to collect cash proffer from. Other of it is, something to a court facility, which isn't eligible. But that's correct. You have no way under today's law, under the authority given to you by the General Assembly, to take into account any unbuilt homes out there today, or even, as I said, as one gets approved but is not yet built.
If I may too, and this, I'm going to say this is my favorite question, because what's missing from the law, the language, the phrase that's missing from the legislation is committed capacity. It just says existing capacity. And so there is this issue of committed capacity that's missing. And it does exist in lots of other places around the country where you can do impact fees. It's a very similar language to impact fee law elsewhere, but they tend to include the committed capacity element so that you can account for that. And it's also not as stringent and strict as the way that this cash proffer law is written, most of the other impact fee law. But that's that phrase, and through our work with Virginia APA, we've really pushed to try to get that to include it, because this is a huge issue, especially with the rezoning case. I mean, it's more so in the rezoning than anything. But I do have to say too, in terms of the planning for facilities, the school board and their capital facilities planning are, those plans are an outgrowth of what they see in terms of the pipeline and what's been committed and those kinds of things. And so it's tied into the plan, but the trigger and the cash proffer eligibility is where it falls short.
In a meaningful way.
Yeah. And
but
I could go on for
back to
hours
your
on that.
back to your point, Mr. Minnick, we could take those roughly 3,000 approved homes and we could run them through the model, and it would give us the impact, the financial impact. It would not, however, adjust the trigger for capacity increases.
Yep.
But we could calculate the absorption of all of the excess capacity, the capital impact dollars, but it just wouldn't drive the.
Right, because isn't the 2,600 or so homes that are approved already calculated some schools impact? They were included in those original proffers under the old proffer law. So where am I going with this? So the hang on just a second. So, but the school's model for its capital project did incorporate those students that were thrown off from the 2,600 new roofs. So those are in this model.
They're in the projection that drove the CIP,
That drove
new
the
school
CIP,
10 years
yeah, the
out.
new requirement,
But
right.
it doesn't change at all the current number of students sitting in chairs.
Right.
And that's the part that would trigger
Yeah.
the capacity.
So we still have, no matter what we do, we still have a delta somewhere of a capacity delta, even though we have it projected in our long-term, in our 25-year CIP.
Yep.
Okay.
That could be significant.
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Yes, sir.
To Ms. McGee's sheriff comment. We, as we need more deputies, we buy cars, and we do those in our capital plan, correct? But those would not be considered here because they're not in a 25-year plan. They're based on need as the need arises.
It's actually a little finer point than that, and that is the new cash proffer law, when it talks about the eligible facilities, the eligible improvements, every category is tied to construction. So if you are not constructing,
Right.
it doesn't matter that more rooftops need more vehicles, which are a capital cost,
Right.
or more school buses, which are capital cost. If you're not constructing, then you can't look at the capital cost in a cash proffer eligibility. And the only, just to finish up now, so I'm
Okay.
not, there are one set of assumptions about fire apparatus, and that is only because that fire apparatus is related to the construction of a fire station. So you literally are having a construction project, and these are costs related thereto. It doesn't do any good to have the brick and mortar of a fire station if you don't put the trucks there. Anything that is not specifically related to construction is not included in the current law.
So do you have to build a parking garage for the sheriff's vehicles? I'm kidding. Right?
I know you are. I know.
Is that additional thoughts? I have another one, Julie, if you don't mind. This model, which is fairly elegant, is done in a software package. Who owns the software?
It's in Excel,
in
but the
Excel.
county, it's licensed to the county.
So it's licensed, so we would pay for this going forward, and there'd be
It's actually part of the original contract.
support. They would support the model, any improvements, modifications. There's an owner's manual, I assume. I mean, this would be something that the county would take over and run and operate, and what would be supported by
Correct.
to the extent needed.
Yeah.
And-
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I just want to get.
I have your phone number.
Yeah. Joanne has my number.
Julie, is there anything unusual about this Goochland model compared to other models that you've done around the state or the country? Is there anything here that jumps out that says this is really weird or different, or is this pretty much?
Just the excellent staff.
Well said. And we agree, by the way.
Yeah, for sure. I'm serious. Yeah.
But
No, it's
there's
been, no,
nothing-
I mean, it's forward thinking, like I said, we do fiscal models elsewhere, but it's amazing. We do a lot of work is tied to comprehensive plans, and there's sort of a lot of questions out there. Well, how you going to pay for this? Who's going to pay for what? Those kinds of philosophical questions that doesn't always come up. And so to really to put this through first, and to have the process also with the public facilities plan, tie it with the CIP. I mean, that's really good planning, and then to tie it to a tool that can be used to help make decisions. That I plan to use this as an example elsewhere, and so I will be calling on Joanne a lot and in the future. But it is a really good example of coordinated effort, forward thinking, and really a critical eye to a lot of these kinds of questions, despite the cash proffer law. In spite of it, to really kind of look forward and get a good handle on this.
Okay, great. Joanne, your rates are reasonable when they call, right? Okay. Any other thoughts or questions for?
So just one other thought. I mean, so one of our objectives here was to be able to provide a tool so that citizens countywide could see what the impacts, potential impacts, long-term impacts of development, commercial and residential would be. And so I think we kind of hit the mark now. I think we could argue, I think, that we may need to tweak a number from time to time in order to adjust our assumptions based on the model, but it looks like we kind of hit our target here with being able to at least advise the community at large, the potential fiscal impacts, because this portion of it hardly covers any of the other, as we talked about, none of the operational components here, and some of the other, some of the other requirements, some of the other long-term requirements. So, I think we've given pretty good heads up here that I'm sure we'll be getting a lot of feedback, that we can anticipate getting a lot of feedback from.
And one thing that I know the board members are aware, but citizens need to perhaps be reminded of, and that is, we used to have an old cash proffer system, but it still never met all the impacts of development.
Correct.
It didn't meet all the capital facilities, and it also did not take into account staffing and operation and maintenance. And so, people who look at this and go, wow, it costs so much to allow development. Should we allow it? Well, it's always cost this, as John said earlier. We just never had the number. We never knew what the number was. And so, there wasn't a number before that showed you, gosh, you're not paying for these other impacts, but they existed. So that's not really different. It's just different that we now have a number.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things for me that this model helped bring some clarity to, which is the impacts that are not proffer eligible but are real. In this case, obviously libraries and courts and general administration are all excluded from proffer eligibility to begin with, and then this model determined there's no impact for sheriff, animal protection, middle schools, some other. So when you start to exclude all of that plus all the operational needs, there's quite a bit of costs that are not even in the proffer eligible numbers, which we were unaware of before, and this model helps bring that to light. So.
Whenever you all are officially done with Julia, I will make the next sort of segue into adopting of this model. And Julie, thanks for your patience as we sort of had just general discussion while you were there and available.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Julie, I don't know if you need to get your finger looked at for changing the slides.
Yeah.
No,
I think it's just the clicker.
I'm fine. And you've been standing quite a while, so we do appreciate your indulgence, and you've been able to answer all of our questions, and so I thank you for that. And thank you so much for all the hard work. And we second your comment about how the high quality staff that we have here in Goodson. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
And so the action item before the board tonight is actually to adopt this capital capital impact study and model by adopting an amendment to your proffer policy. It is significant now, the long-range planning aspects aside. What is very important, and I think very well done by what the work both staff and Tischler Weiss has put in, is to have adopted something that is very reasonable and defensible under the new cash proffer law. Unlike our old proffer policy, there is, as we've said, no set number. There is no set number that any person, developer, house has to meet in this county. What we have is just a tool to look at each development individually to generate what it will anticipated impact in a specifically attributable way, which generally means in its region, in its physical area, except for those types of facilities that are accessed and for which demand is generated countywide. And that does take into account the need, whether or not there is need for capacity, or whether or not we have plans to build capacity. So, for instance, this community has taken the forward look to build this animal shelter that we anticipate having capacity for at least the next 25 years. And that's a phenomenal thing to have done. In this case, it's not therefore included in cash proffer calculations. But, you know, that's because we know there's not a need for new capacity in that category. With respect to the actual adoption, your proffer policy was included in the packet in two ways, because you all know me well enough now that when I start to rewrite something, there's a lot of markup. And a good bit of it was frankly just moving things around, okay? So when we look at your proffer policy, paragraph 1 remains essentially the same. Paragraph 2 just generally got moved, okay? And in paragraph 3, where we talk about development impact statement, we now tell all applicants that they still have an opportunity to prepare a development impact statement and put it before the board with respect to their proposed development. Really the only thing changed in that section was we updated the documents that you would look at. Because of all the planning that's occurred since last summer when we changed the proffer policy, we now can sort of even limit the number of documents you have to go to. With that 25-year CIP, the public facilities plan, there are fewer things you have to look at. So that was really the only change made there. The biggest piece to your proffer policy is in the paragraph 4 where we actually adopt the capital impacts model. And what we find there is that, you know, the study's been done. It is based on all the documents that's available to the county, based on our real plans for money that we will spend and facilities that we will need and capacities that are necessary. And that the model that has been created to be able to look at independent developments and to take into account what region of the county they're in, where their school children will be going, and whether or not they're age restricted, and to then come up for you a number that is to be used by staff. And staff will be using it to compare to development impact statements that you've received and tell you where there are differences or just, you know, differences in analysis or data. And that's the tool that we've been waiting on, been hoping for, been promising folks we're working on. In addition, I think it is just fair to say to your applicants, after they've, you know, identified their location and their types of development and so forth, if they want staff to run the number and hand it to them and say, here's what we would be thinking would be reasonable, I think that applicants ought to be entitled to themselves determine if they think that's fair. I mean, there is 115 pages that tells you exactly how those numbers are going to get done. And if they review that and determine that that data is reasonable and they are approve of the methodology, that they be entitled to certify that they would like to base a proffer that they're going to offer on the study and the model information. And as long as they have determined themselves that they find that to be reasonable, that they would be allowed to use it for their proffer determination. And so after that, we go through, again, just some paragraphs that have been moved around or changed not at all. You still have the one residential lot where the board, as a policy decision, has decided not to ask for an impact statement or to consider any impacts. And there is no changing the rest of the language. And finally, let me just say that the capital impact study and model are to allow you to determine the what level of reasonable proffer could be considered. You, as a policy matter, are entitled to approve zoning cases that you feel meet the planning and the impacts and are good, make good sense for the health, safety, welfare, and benefit of Goochland County. So this is just one tool in your toolbox. But this, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and this, the final action we would request from all of this is that you adopt the amended proffer policy, which would then put into play the capital impact study and model.
Ms. McGee, thank you for that overview. Questions for County Attorney? So just to remind folks, this entire capital impact study, the development of the model, the outside consultants, the revisions of the policy, really weren't initiated by the county. This was kind of triggered by the General Assembly changing legislation that required us and mandated that we take a different view toward assessing the impacts in Goochland County. Initially, I wasn't all that happy with having to spend the money for an outside consultant and spend all the staff's time to do this, but now that we see the results and what much better visibility it gives us into all of the costs, not just the profitable costs, but all the costs of development, it's going to be a real benefit to the county going forward to have such a tool. So with that, are there any other questions for the county attorney? All right, well, seeing none, then I'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
So, Mr. Chairman, I move that we amend the Proffer policy to adopt the capital impact study and model.
Okay, it's been moved to approve the resolution to adopt an amended Proffer policy. Do we have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and second. Mr. Badesky, for this one, why don't we go ahead and do a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Alvarez.
Yes.
Mr. Minnick.
Yes.
Ms. Lachelette.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes. There we have it. It was unanimous. The amended Proffer policy is adopted. In some regards, first I just want to thank staff again and our consultants for all the work that went into this. In many respects, Goochland now is doing things we've never done before and breaking some new ground. Moving from a 5-year to a 25-year CIP in itself was something new for the county. Adopting a public facility plan as part of the comprehensive plan was new for the county. Schools doing a long-term facilities plan, which shifted the focus to an accumulated depreciation view of the assets to see what the useful life is. This capital impact model, all of this is all groundbreaking, brand new for the county, and it took an awful lot of work. So again, I just want to thank everybody involved with all that work today to move the county forward. With that said, that was the last formal item on the agenda. I want to mention our upcoming meetings. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, February 20th at 3 p.m. It'll be a budget session, and that is open to the public. There'll be another meeting on Tuesday, February 27th at 3 p.m., another budget session, again, open to the public. We then have our next regularly scheduled board meeting will be Tuesday, March 6th. We'll start off with an 11:30 a.m. Audit and Finance Committee meeting, which is open to the public, a 1:30 Central High School ribbon cutting, again open to the public, and a 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. regularly scheduled meetings on March 6th, and you're all invited to attend. That said, is there any other business to come before this body? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you for coming out tonight and travel home safely.